Hello everyone and welcome to round 6 of Chess Olympiad. Today India was playing Hungary and we'll be going over the match which was very interesting. So today Gukesh was playing against Richard Rapport who is one of the most creative players of today's chess world. He is capable of beating anyone on his day. He recently beat Carlsen with the black pieces in 25 moves. So this board was the most dangerous board for us, but of course we can trust on Gukesh. He held his own and gave us a draw. So we'll go over the game. It's Richard Rapport versus Gukesh. Richard goes for e4. Gukesh plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, castles, knight e4. So this is a Berlin. This is also called the Rio Gambit. Uh, Here white goes rook e1, which is a very interesting line, which have been really popular recently. Black goes knight d6, knight e5, bishop e7, bishop f1, knight e5, rook e5, castle. So it's all very popular theory till now, and it's a lot drawish that this is kind of position that Gukesh generally doesn't go for because he's always trying for a win. But today, as he's playing the strongest player of the opponent team, he's happy with a draw with black. White goes knight c3, bishop f6, rook e1, rook e8, knight d5. So here black just wants to exchange all the pieces and go into an endgame and just draw the game. Gukesh goes rook e1, knight f6, queen f6, queen e1, b6. So the position here is very symmetrical. 3 pawns on the king side and 4 pawns on the queen side for both white and black. But the difference here is white has the bishop pair, black has the knight and bishop. On the other hand, black has a very well developed pieces. The queen is on f6, knight on d6, bishop coming to b7, and then the rook will come to e8 with all the pieces playing very actively. So here white goes d3, opening up the c1 bishop, bishop b7, queen b4, c5, queen f4, takes, and knight f5. Even though white has managed to exchange the queens and get his pieces developed, these two bishops are not really ideally placed because the position is not really open. And the strongest white diagonal of the position, the h1a diagonal, is greatly occupied by the black bishop. So this bishop doesn't really have a diagonal to be on. So white goes f3, closing down this bishop. f6, king f2, g5, bishop d2, and h5. So actually black is playing very well here, expanding on the king side with such nice pawns. There is no h4 break because the knight will just capture it, and black is just fine here, but not better because of course it's the bishop pair. c3, king f7, bishop e2, bishop d5, bishop d1, knight g7. So here Gukesh is trying to get the knight to e6 and then maybe in the future jump to f4, hitting this, and if he manages to get one of the bishops out, then there will be like no danger and he might even try for a win. White goes bishop a4, rook d8. Black shouldn't go here because of bishop b3. Here finally the white bishop gets a diagonal and now the tables might turn. So there is no need for this. He just defends the d7 pawn with rook d8, bishop c2, h4, a4, knight e6, on the way to f4, a5, b5. So we keep all the files close because as close the position, the more powerful the knight will be. a6, rook b8, rook a5, d6. So now we can see that all these pawns are very well protected. Nothing really can attack any of the pawns. This d6 pawn might look loose, but there is no real way to attack it because all the g3, f4 and d5 squares are protected by black's own pawn. White goes b4, black goes f5, takes, takes, and c4. So white is desperately trying to open up the position, after which white will gain some kind of play. But right now these two bishops are just dead. So here it's a very interesting position. Why black doesn't take on c4, because after if he had taken the c4, bishop c4 and bishop b5, the position suddenly becomes a bit open, and this g5 pawn, c5 pawn, and while threatening bishop e6, everything might become a little bit loose. So there is no real need to open up the position. Black just drops back to c6, takes, rook b5, rook b5, bishop b5, bishop b3. So white just takes the draw here, f4. I think even bishop d3 is just a draw, because bishop e6, king e6, bishop g5, h3 is an important move, after which g3 and black takes here, which is just dead draw. Nothing can be done here. But Gukesh keeps a slight chance for himself and goes f4, saying, I'm threatening these two pawns. If you can't protect, I might have a chance in the endgame. White goes g3, takes, takes, bishop d3, and here just they just take the draw, because bishop e6, king e6, and king g2 is immediate draw, stopping h3 and threatening bishop g5, exchanging all the pawns on the king side, and without any pawns on the king side, these two pawns can never win. So after bishop e3, hg3, king g3, king f6, bishop e6, king e6, bishop c5, bishop a6, bishop a6. Here I should have gone bishop a7, but he just plays f4, takes, takes, bishop, king d5, and bishop a7. So it's a very clean draw from Gukesh, and we are already at a very good position, because the most dangerous board has been held comfortably without any kind of risks. So now we move on to the next game, that is between Praggnanandhaa and Peter Leko. So here Praggnanandhaa was white, and he was also almost 100 points over Peter's rating. He's almost now retired and is a very wonderful commentator and coach, but still he plays like a giant. Praggnanandhaa goes e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game. Actually, Peter Leko is very well known for this Italian games, and he has won many games with the white pieces, and is almost undefeatable in this kind of structures with the black pieces. But now he has retired, so white definitely has some chances. Bishop c5, d3, knight f6, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. So this is the same opening that we saw yesterday also. D6, white just drops back to g3 and hopes he can break open the center with c3 and d4. c3, a5, castle, and g5. Yesterday we saw knight d2, castle, and a3 in Gukesh's game, but Prag goes for castle, g5, bishop g3, and now castle, knight a3, bishop a3, ba3, bishop g4, rook e1, king g7. So this position is really okay for black. I think that there should be no problems whatsoever. He has given up this beautiful c5 bishop that looks on to f2, but even after that the position is really close. This bishop is just looking at the wall, and white has this double pawns. So white goes rook b1, taking advantage of the open file. Rook b8, d4, knight h5, rook e3, knight f4, h3, bishop f5, queen d2. So white just gets away from the pin. Black has managed to get his knight to the beautiful f4 square, blocking this bishop totally. And I think now black might even try to go for something more than a draw. Black goes queen f6, king h2, b6. Even though black has all these pieces on this on the king side, with this knight coming over, white is never really in much of a danger of getting mated because of this wonderful bishop, because this defends the white king very well. White goes bishop b5, knight d8, knight e1, knight e6, solidifying the f4 square. So if ever white takes on f4, which white wouldn't, but still black might have a chance to take with the f4 pawn out, e6 knight. Also this attacks the d4 pawn, which is an additional benefit. White plays knight c2, bishop g6, f3, h5. So now finally black is trying to go for some kind of breaks, and I really like black's position. Black might go to h8, keeping an eye on the king, and then g4 somewhere, h4 even, and black is like the opening has gone very well for black. So rook f1, h4, bishop f2, knight h5. Here black could have tried to go for something more by going c5, getting rid of the tension in the center, and then maybe trying for something like queen e7, f5, and breaking open the king side. But black goes knight h5, king g1, king h7, rook d1, rook d8, rook e1, knight hf4. Black doesn't really have much of a plan anymore because he has played h4, giving up the dreams of g4. Knight e3, queen g7, queen b2, f6. Black has a wonderful pawn chain here, but not really many breaks. White goes rook d2, queen e7, rook d1, king h8, queen b3, just moving around pieces, queen h7, bluffing with some kind of f5 break in the future, bishop c4, rook e8 protecting the knight, queen b5, rook e7, bishop f1, bishop e8. So black doesn't really have much of any plan here, because if he goes ever d5, then d5 is coming, f5 also, d5 is coming with some opening in the center, which black definitely doesn't want, because white has the bishop pairs, which might get active very quickly. So white goes back queen b2, bishop g6, rook e1. So white really doesn't want to take the draw here still, but I don't know why. What else white can do, because white also doesn't have any kind of plan. If he tries to go for something dangerous, it might even backfire. Like goes rook e8, queen c1, rook e7, queen d1, rook e8, queen a1, rook e7. So black says that you don't have any kind of plans, I'll just wait. If you do something, I'll pounce on you. Queen c1, rook e8, queen b2, rook e7, rook d1, rook e8, rook d2, rook e7, and rook d1. It's a draw. So black had played the same move for the last 12 moves, and white couldn't do anything. So this just shows how solid the black's position is. And with this, we are at 1-1 after 2 games, with our best board, Arjun versus Sijurov Sanan, coming up. So here we move on to game number 3, that is Sanan Sijurov and Arjun. Sijurov has recently transferred from Russian Federation to Hungary and is playing for this team. He's a very strong grandmaster with his peak over 2700. He plays e4, Arjun goes e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, d6. So this is a very recent and very old both way, because this has been first played by Morphy, but even the engines nowadays like this variation very much. So a lot of players are playing this nowadays. So after d6, rook e1, bishop d7, c3, g6, d4, bishop g7, h3, castle. So this is a very well-known black just enters this bishop with some idea of bishop g4 and putting some pressure on d4, but white doesn't allow it, goes h3 to stop it, and black can sometimes go b5, rook e8 takes here and put some pressure on the e4 pawn. White goes knight d2, takes, knight b4, exchanging this strong Ruy Lopez bishop. White takes here, queen d7, queen b3, a5, a3, and knight c6. So this is, I think, Arjun's preparation, because he just gives up this b7 pawn, but has a lot of play actually for it. Arjun goes d5, knight b8, queen b7, knight a6. To mention that he couldn't have taken the pawn immediately because rook b8 is a trap, so had to go d5 first, knight b8 and queen b7, knight a6. But this knight maneuver enables it to jump to on c5 and put a lot of pressure on the e4 pawn, because white hasn't really completed its development, and which will mean that black can if black can manage to get some attacks or threats quickly, then white is in trouble. White goes queen b3, knight c5, queen c4. Here just black just exchanges the queen. e5, queen c4, knight c4 and d5. Here white just gives back the pawn with the knight d5 and knight d5. This might look very drawish with no queens on the board, this good knight on c4. But the problem here is this g7 bishop is just way too strong, and it might change the dynamic of the position totally if it can get some attacks on b2 pawn with knight jumping to b3, d3, f4, d3. So Arjun, so white goes rook d1 here, black goes knight b6, bishop e3, knight f4, bishop d4, rook d8, bishop b6, which is a bit awkward because white really doesn't want to give up the bishop and also connect the separated pawns here. But after bishop b6, black takes here happily, knight d7, rook e8, knight b6, knight b6, knight b6, bishop b2. So what I think white missed here is after this there's a 2-pawn island, that is h7, g6, f7, a5, and for white h3, g2, f2, a3. And when there are 2-pawn islands on the two separate sides of the board, the bishop is always much stronger. But this will not be the case if white can manage to get a4 and exchange all the rooks. But that's the main play here. Rook d8, rook d8, rook a2, protecting the pawn, rook d1 check, king h2, bishop d4, hitting this knight, keeping an eye on the f2 pawn, knight c4, a4, and here black gets the move a4, after which white really doesn't have a way to attack this. Knight b2, black goes rook d2 and pins the rook. If knight b6, then black just picks up the knight, and this two squares like c3 and c5 is just covered. White goes g3, black goes bishop c5, rook c2, rook d4, king g2, king g7, king f8, rook c3, king e7. Black just brings the king and will try to exchange these rooks and just take the a3 pawn. Knight e5, rook d5, knight d3, bishop b6. It's actually such masterclass endgame because this is still a very easy draw actually if you look at it like a separate position. But the time situation and playing the Olympiad against Arjun on this round is always a bit pressure, and white kind of falters here. King f3, rook b5, king e2, rook b3. Here if white had taken here after a b3, this bishop going to d4 will stop any kind of attack on the b3 pawn, and then black king will slowly go pick up the a3 pawn, and while keeping the pressure on the king side. So white goes knight b4, which is based on the tactics of rook c3, knight d5, walking back the rook. If black goes king d6, knight c3, and picks up the a4 pawn. So black goes king d7, moving away from the fork, but here white just messes up and goes rook d3, not realizing that after exchanging the rooks, this bishop will become much more powerful with the pawn on black square on a3 and f2 and g3. Black just takes here. White can't take with the king, which he would have definitely liked to, but because of bishop f2. So knight f2, king c6. White can go here, knight e5, king d5, knight f7, bishop c5, taking this, knight g5, h6, knight f7, bishop a3, king d3. But the problem here is, even without being a pawn up, black has this very strong outside pass pawn which will lure the king away to b1, and then this king will go into f3 and just pick up all these pawns. So white doesn't go knight e5, he goes king d2, bishop d4. This is just a very classy move. This says that the f2 pawn is weak, this knight is only protecting it, and if this knight can't move, you can't come to c4. Also, if this knight ever moves, like goes f3 and then tries to move, black has always the idea of going bishop b2 and bishop a3. f3, king d5, king c2, bishop g7, h4. h4 is a very strange move because you don't really want to put pawns on the black square. You should have definitely gone something like g4, but I can understand it's already lost because black is going in with king d4 and king e3. But h4 is not really any kind of a good move. Black just plays f6, bishop f6, king d2, king c4. The king runs to a3, king c2, h5, and now this pawns will come under pressure because black will try to go after this pawn. If the knight goes after this pawn, black will just pick up the g3 and h4 pawn. Here we can clearly see the difference between the bishop and knight when the pawns are on two flanks, as the bishop can easily move from a3 to g3 in just one move, bishop d6 and come bishop g3. But here the knight can't do that. If he goes to a4, and it will take almost like 1 2 3 4 moves to capture another pawn on the king side. So white goes g4, which is just a resignation almost. Black could have gone here also, but he just says I'll take the pawn first. 8g, bishop h4, knight e5, king d5, knight f7, bishop f6, and now this knight is trapped. Black king will just come here and just pick up the knight. King d3, king f7, knight h6, bishop g5, knight f5. The final trap, saying that if you takes king f5, I am going to go king c4, king b5 and pick up your last pawn, which will be a draw. But of course black doesn't take here. Black just goes king d5, guarding this pawn. The bishop is coming back here and taking the a3 pawn. And with this, Arjun has won the 6th game here. His live rating is now 2791, 9 points away from 2800, and he's just clearly crushing everyone on the board 3. With this win, we have got 2-1 lead, and we move on to the final game, that is between Vidit and Gledura. Gledura is also a very young player who is very strong in the opening. He has made a lot of courses also. But Vidit was white, so we were very safe because Vidit generally doesn't lose with white. He goes for his trusted queen's pawn opening: d4, d5, c4, c6, cd, cd. This is a Slav exchange variation which had a very bad reputation of being very drawish. But nowadays, with engine and all, this reputation has changed, and white really tries for some advantage in this variation, as we can see in this game. Takes, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, bishop f4. This is all theory. a6. Here Vidit plays this somewhat new move, queen b3. Generally white goes e3 here, bishop g4, h3, bishop f3, queen f3, but he doesn't really want to give up this knight, so he goes queen b3. This also has the purpose of stopping this bishop from coming out. So black goes e6, e3, bishop d6, takes. I already kind of like white's position because this bishop is forever locked inside the pawn chain, and these dark squares are going to get very weak after white gets its knights to b6 and e5. White plays bishop e2, castle, rook b8, rook c1, rook e8. So the only kind of plan that black has in this kind of position is going e5 and opening up this bishop, but this will create a very isolated weak pawn on d5. So after knight a4, e5, takes, queen b6, white is happy to go into the endgame, where this knight on b6 will be very strong. This pawn is isolated and this knight is ready to jump to d4. Black takes with the queen, knight b6, bishop g4, rook c7, the rook enters. It's nice to see that this knight is controlling these two important squares so that black can't really challenge the c5. Black takes with the bishop, gf3, d4. So I think Gledura thought after d4 black will very easily equalize, because this f4 square might become weak if white takes on d4, and without that he has just got rid of his only weakness for the position. But it's a bit different here. White goes rook d1, takes, and knight c6. White goes e4. The difference between white's and black's position is that all white's pieces are very well placed and is going to get more of an advantage and attack on the f7 pawn. Also, white might try to go something like rook d7, and he also has a very strong center with the pawn on e4. Black really can't challenge it with f5 because it will open up the king side, and also this e4 pawn restricts this f6 knight. So black goes rook e7, takes, knight e7, king f2, knight c6, rook c1, knight d4, bishop c4. So this bishop is very strong on this diagonal, keeping an eye on f7, rook d8, king e3, king f8, bishop f1, knight e6, bishop h3. So Vidit is saying that I'm okay with giving up my bishop, but if I take here, your pawn will become weak on e6 and I'll be able to enter the 7th rank. So he prevents it. Rook c7 with knight e8, white goes f4, g5, takes, rook c8. So if black takes on c8, white will just take with the bishop, and these two pawns are on the white square, and after knight d6, bishop f5, this king will enter. And as we saw in the previous game, if there are pawns on both the flanks, the bishop is much stronger than the knight. So black goes h6, h4, knight e6, bishop g4, knight g7, king f4. With this knight g7 move, he allows the final piece that is not yet in the game, the white king, to enter the attack. So knight g7, king f4, f6, b4, king f7, e5. So without a e5, white was not really going to enter with the king. So after e5, this just opens up the position clearly. Takes, king, knight e8. This is like very passive. The knight is still brilliant, and these pawns are fixed on white squares. White goes a4, king e7, knight d5, king d8, bishop e2, knight c8, bishop f3, keeping an eye on the b7 pawn here, b6. I think white could have gone a5 here, but the problem is black might get this kind of maneuver like knight a7, king d4, knight c6, king c5, and knight e5, getting some kind of play here. Even if white goes king b6, black can just defend the b7 pawn with knight d6. So white doesn't really allow this and goes bishop f3, b6, getting the pawns out of white square. White plays h5. This is a bit anti-theoretical, because it said that you shouldn't put the pawns on the same color as of your bishop. But the difference here is this h6 pawn is becoming much weaker, and this king can run whenever he wants and pick up the h6 pawn, and this pawn is now much further pushed. Black goes knight c7, knight e3. Vidit says I'll go for the h6 pawn with my knight, keeping my king on the center. Black goes knight e7, knight g4, knight g8, bishop e4, threatening bishop h7 and taking the g8 knight, and thus taking the h6 pawn. Black goes knight e8, bishop g6, knight e7, takes, and king d6. So as this pawn is just hanging, white can just pick it up anytime he wants. He couldn't pick it up now because black had this nice knight c6 move, which is still winning though, because the h6 pawn is much stronger. White can go something like this: knight b4, king g7, move the knight and just queen the pawn. But of course, white doesn't really need to allow this kind of counterplay. White goes king d6, b5, takes, and knight h6. So white has won a pawn. This h pawn is super strong, and the king is coming and picking up the second pawn. And two pawns on two flanks, the knight can't really do much. So with this win, India has won their 6th round with 3-1 against the very strong home team of Hungary A, which clearly shows that our team is fully in form. And with this game, India has got into the clear lead because China drew against Vietnam, and now it's a matter of a few more rounds before we get the gold medal. So thank you everyone for watching. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. If you have any kind of suggestion regarding future videos or even this Olympiad, you can write in the comment section. I'll definitely try to improve, and see you guys tomorrow with the recap of round 7, where India is going to be facing either China or USA if USA wins, but let's see. Anyway, thank you all. Bye bye.